am not the same person I was when I was 18. I'm 28 now, and I've developed and grown in some new ways and grown some new pathways. And I realize at this particular moment in my life, those habits that I have developed that are productive, I can keep those. But those things that are unproductive, I need to get rid of them. Hi, everybody. Lee Scott here. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee, where on here we talk about life, leadership, and legacy. And we want to help you discover the leader within because we believe that every person has a capacity and level of leadership. I'm so glad that you are here. And if you have not done it yet, subscribe right now to Leading with Lee on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. If you are listening to the podcast version of this, you are getting episodes every single week right now because we are premiering episodes from last season of Leading with Lee on the alternate weeks. And I'm glad that you've had that opportunity to engage with our content. But today, I'm so glad that you're here because this month is Women's History Month on one end, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's also an opportunity for us to continue to have the conversation as it relates to you discovering the leadership within you. So today I want to take some time and unpack this idea of where does leadership start? You know, sometimes when we have this conversation about leadership, we seem to throw away the idea that everything has a starting point, right? With that all of us have to come into a knowledge of something in order for us to begin to develop it, right? And today I want to kind of talk about that because I think that that's super important for you and I as we go forward and as we move forward and as we begin to grow in our capacity to make a difference in the spaces that we're in. So let's start out real quickly and real early that I always do on every single episode at this point. I today want to talk to you about leadership, but I got to give you some definition, okay? So let's start with defining. I'm going to give you my leadership definition, and I'm doing it on every single new episode of Leading because I think it's super important for you to have context from the vantage point in which I come when I talk about this subject of leadership. So let's get into that right now. I believe that leadership is seeing something that has not happened yet and taking people, organizations, and personal processes in that direction. Again, leadership is seeing something that has not happened yet and taking people, organizations, and personal processes in that direction. So we're going to talk about where does leadership start? And obviously, that is a question that many of us have probably had throughout our lives. We've wondered, how did you get to this point? So I did some research and I want to give you some origins of this idea of the leadership theory. It's something that I was looking into. And when we talk about the leadership theory, there are some interesting perspectives that have been put out there as it relates to this idea. There are four leadership theories that are out there currently that people are saying are the main ones, but here are some that are very common. One is transformational leadership. The second one is transactional leadership. Third is charismatic leadership. And then we have Fiedler's contingency theory, which is a very interesting concept as relates to leadership that drives home a lot of interesting things. And we'll circle back and get back to that. But I want to really focus on this idea of leadership has often been defined by errors in history. We have had concepts based on time frames within our historical culture that have defined what we consider leadership. So here are a few of those timelines. From the 1840s to the 1940s, there was the leadership theory that was predominant in our culture was the great man theory. And basically it stated that leaders are born and not made. And we understand if we look historically at some of the individuals that were prominent in their time, those individuals were very strong individuals. They were very charismatic. They were very dominant figures. They just had qualities. And something that I always talk about as it relates to this, I don't believe that leadership is a personality trait. It seems that even in this theory that those people were leaders simply because they might have been just a charismatic or a loud or dominant figure. So therefore, people assumed that they were credible because they had a very dominant personality, or they just had dominant traits about them. And sometimes we celebrate those things as being great. But what's interesting is that was considered to be leadership at one point in time. And obviously we've seen that that has changed and developed over time, that some people that just have these certain personalities are going to be celebrated as credible because, for whatever reason, they are who they are. And sometimes people are who they are because of nurture and nature. And we'll get to that here in a moment. Here's another theory another theory or concept that we had for a while in our culture, because we believe that this is a different era within the leadership theory, is behavioral theory. Behavioral theory went on for about a decade. That it was the belief that leaders are made. In other words, people can develop into who they become. People can grow into who they become. People can get and be made into the individual that you need them to be because they are being processed within a space. And that's interesting because we can see that that is normative in most business cultures, that even though we are in a new era, there's still a lot of that happening. That the only reason why somebody is getting a position or getting an opportunity is because they were made into the individual. In other words, they went and got the education to be a software developer. So therefore, they're going into the software development space and they're able to be a leader in that space because they have a set of skills that is comparable to the position that they are in, right? And so here's what's fascinating for us. It is, we can see that there's been a progression. We went from it being a personality thing, it being a hey, this is something that no one can attain, to our systems can make people leaders. Our systems can actually develop and create the leadership that we need within our environment and culture, right? But then we moved on to another situation and another idea. It's funny that I said situation because the next era of leadership concepts, which was lasted about 30 years, was a situational era of leadership, meaning that situations have to happen in order for us to find out how powerful and how effective people can be. I shared in the last episode of leading that one of the things that we find out in our culture is you can unlock a person's leadership by putting them in situations. You can unlock how effective an individual is by putting them in spaces that requires certain things from them and force them to have to develop or force them to have to respond to some things that's happening in their space. And situations actually reveal a great deal about people. It reveals a great deal of who they are and how they show up in the world. And that was the preeminent theory that was driving the 1960s up until the 1990s. And then we see there's another shift that happens in the 2000s where transactional and transformational becomes the preeminent idea theory that we have within the leadership space. And though the theories have changed over time, and though these are different concepts and different beliefs about how leadership is developed or grown and changed, today I want to give you some ideas of what I believe it starts for you. Because I think though we have these theoretical ideas, you need practical steps, right? You need practical steps on how to discover, how to become, how to show up, how to move into the spaces that you want to be in, because that's what matters to you. Whether you're driving in your car or listening to this on your way to work, or listening to this as you're cleaning up your house, or even maybe watching this on YouTube, or you may have some time to sit down and write. I want you to really think today about how is it that you are showing up in the world and being effective in the spaces that people need you to be in. So I want to give you some 3 ways that I think we actually can discover our leadership and figure out where it starts, but also give you some strategy on how to be effective in discovering that or rediscovering what is already in you. So let's first talk about this idea. I think the first thing that we need to realize is that leadership starts when we are actually young. It starts in adolescence. It starts in the earliest stages of your life. There was an article that was done by Heartline.com, and they found it in a Harvard study that before children turn the age of 3 years old, they have already formed 1 million neurological connections every minute. 1 million neurological connections in their brain every minute. That is unbelievable. And it goes on to talk about how there's links between that and brain mapping for children, where basically it is a combination of nurture and nature, especially when it comes down to serve and return interactions. Basically, in other words, kids are generally developed and cultivated how they make their decisions through this idea of reciprocity. They're affected by, hey, if I do this one thing, this happens. If I do this other thing, this happens. And they begin to learn those things very quickly, very young. There are other studies that have said that you learn the most between birth and about 7 years old. A lot of your development happens at that particular time. Your self-belief, your self-worth, all those things happen very early in your life. And a lot of times, if you would notice, kids have a way of informing us about who they could be at that particular time. Now, there may be a parent or an older sibling. If you sit back and watch your younger brothers or sisters, if you sit back and watch your kid who might be 5 or 6 years old, they may give you some indication of their capacity for certain things. I remember when I was that age, how as I've said on here before, I was very creative. I would always run around and do different things. And I was very talkative, and I was always very expressive as a kid. And I think now, as I reflect, if my parents and I had built some structures in my life to harness that creativity, I wonder how much further in life would I be, or how many things I would have done differently if I understood my unique gifts and talents that were just showing up in me naturally. And a lot of times when we think about gifts and talents, they seem too normal to us for us to invest in. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I want to give you some indicators that it has been close to you this whole time, and you may have not actually noticed how it's showing up. But then it goes on this article to talk about attachment styles, even with children, and how kids are socialized to address or engage in issues based on their experiences. And it talks about there are 4 different types of attachment styles that children have in order for them to move or maneuver through the world. Here's the 4 attachment styles. Number 1, it's secure. The second one is anxiety insecure, or anxious insecure. The third one is anxious avoidant. And the last one is disorganized. Once again, the attachment styles are secure, anxious insecure, anxious avoidant, and fourth, disorganized. Now, I find this to be interesting. And the article goes on to talk about how this plays out with the child. If a parent leaves the room, if the child's secure, they generally are not bothered by the parent leaving, right? If the child is insecure, that child might start crying, or the child might react when the parent leaves, and then when that parent comes back, they're good. And then if with the avoidant, if that parent leaves or the individual leaves the rooms, they might cry, and then when that person comes back, that kid might just shut down emotionally, or just completely ignore. And then the disorganized one, it doesn't matter if that person is in the room or not, they are going to be everywhere. And that starts our development, our growth, how we become the people that we are, starts in adolescence. It starts in that early stages of our lives, and it causes us to operate in the ways that we operate. And what I want you to think about today is take some moments to analyze and look back and ask yourself, what was happening at that particular moment in your life? Now, I know all of us don't have healthy or productive experiences when it comes down to that phase of our lives, because the reality is all of us have grown up and live in different circumstances. Whether you think you're a leader or not, the fact of the matter is that circumstance affected how you perceive or what you think about yourself. And it's super important for you to know, and it is noted that you understand how to show up in the world and how it matters for you to realize and rethink what it looks like for you to move and function in the world, and why you can actually find some indicators of why you have why you do some of the things that you do right now. You can find a lot of indicators of why you move the way you move in the world and why you respond the way you respond in the world, which leads me to my second point is habits are learned, but new pathways are possible. I, I think a part of leadership is actually understanding that the way we show up in the world is sometimes built on that first point, things that happen to us as children. You may need to take some time to really think about what was it what was it that was happening in your life at the time? What was happening at the time that was causing you to respond a certain way or do certain things or walk a certain way or carry out certain attributes or show up a particular way? And I think it's super important for you to realize that because of those things, you develop some habits in your life. You develop some coping mechanism. You develop a culture around what you were doing and how you were showing up in the world. And the reality is you got to really think about how does that affect me? How's it affecting me now? What is happening with me right now? But I think that we all have the ability to change some of those patterns. We have some ability to change some of those pathways. And here's the reality. Most of us don't do some of the things that we did when we were 5 or 6 years old, right? Most of us have developed and grown beyond that. Now, I understand that I say that with the caveat of realizing that there are individuals and people, because of things that were out of their control, they may have not developed beyond those attributes and certain things in their lives. And I'm not specifically speaking about those individuals. I think that we should treat those individuals with value and protect them and take care of them. What I am talking about is for those of us who have the cognitive ability to grow and have the cognitive ability and have had the opportunity to grow in certain ways. You should not be doing some of the same things that you were doing when you were 5 or 6 years old. You should not be doing some of the things that you were doing when you were 15 or 16 or 17 years old. If you're a teenager and listen to this, obviously you should be growing and you're in a growth pattern right now. But I am not the same person I was when I was 18. I'm 28 now, and I've developed and grown in some new ways and grown some new pathways. And I realize at this particular moment in my life, those habits that I have developed that are productive, I can keep those. But those things that are unproductive, I need to get rid of them. And developing new pathways and habits can be hard, but it is possible. Studies have shown that it takes actually roughly 30 to 90 days to actually develop a habit. I know that in our culture, one of the things that we talk about all the time is that it takes 21 days to develop a habit. There are different studies that have shown that it could take somewhere between 18 to 224 days to form a habit. But the fact of the matter is, the main thing that it's getting at is you need consistency. Consistently doing something actually develops a habit. When you consistently work at something, it develops new pathways and develops new structures within your life, so you will operate and do certain things. I remember when I was going to the gym consistently, and obviously I need to get back in the gym. That's just something that I personally want to do. And I feel like it will be a healthy habit to get back into. I remember when I was going to the gym consistently, how my body felt when I was going to the gym, how inspired I felt when I was going to the gym, how impactful I felt when I was going to the gym consistently, how energetic I felt. And that feeling had carried over into different aspects of my life when I was going to the gym consistently, because that habit of getting up at 5 a.m. to go to my friend's house to work out with him for an hour, start to develop this thing within me where I, even when I wasn't working out, my body would wake up at 5 a.m. because I was training myself to get up and go and put in some work. And a lot of us, it may not be the gym for you. It may just be your work schedule. Some of us some of us may work from 4 to 1 or 6 to 3, or you may work a 9 to 5. And there's some things that you just do in the morning consistently that prepares you for the day. You may get up, if you work from 9 to 5, you might get up at 7:30 because you have kids and you have to take them to school. Or you may get up at 7:30 because you have some devotional time you need to do, or reading, or you go to the gym in the morning, or you actually hit your alarm 5 times, and that's a part of your habit in the morning when you're preparing for the day. And all of us have them, but the fact of the matter is, it can be changed and developed into something else if we take the time to do it. And you and I have an opportunity right now as we're developing and growing in our leadership this season and this year. You have a chance to create new pathways and develop new habits because you recognize something super important. You recognize that I have to figure out how to start moving in a way that's different. I got to start moving in a way that's unusual for me, but it is necessary because I realize that me moving in that direction is a part of my development and growth, because I fully believe this with all my heart. Leadership is a mindset. It is how you think. It's not in the action. It is not in what you say. It is how you think. If you think like a leader, you'll operate like one. It gets beyond who you are and where you come from. You have to think differently. You got to get in your mind that there are possibilities around you and within you. And if you think that you can achieve something, you will be able to achieve, because it starts here. It starts what's happening right between your ears every single day. Your thought life is super important for you to develop and grow and actually improve, because it is going to affect the trajectory of your life. I'm going to stop right here for a moment, and we'll be right back after this message. Hi, everybody. Lee here, and I want to give some information to you. Do you need someone to host an event or come and speak at your event? You can now book yours truly. Book me for your event by visiting www.leeascott.com. I am so excited to connect with you and do work with you. Much love, and let's get started. And we are back. Thank you for still being here, for leading and continuously listening to this episode. And I hope that you've been inspired to make a difference in the spaces that you're in. I got 2 more points, and I'm really, really excited, because the next episode I'm really going to focus on the last thing, because I think that it's super important to really acknowledge this and talk to you about this particular subject, that you understand where leadership starts for you. You got to get into the work of figuring out, how do I show up in the world? You got to get into the work of realizing that you have something to give, and that people deserve to see the best version of you. Here's my 3rd point. Realize that your leadership is closer than you think. I said it earlier. A lot of times we see the pathways and we see the development of our stuff really early in life. If you actually take some time and look back, you can see that there are some things in you that you have not developed yet, or you haven't been investing in the way that you really could be. So here's what I have a task for you to do as it relates to this, because I want to help you figure it out. I want to help you get some language around what it is that you're trying to do well, what it is that you are trying to be effective at, what it is that you're trying to come alive in. So let me give you a few questions that I think you should ask yourself, and you should take some time to do this. Once again, if you're driving in your car, do this when you get home. Take some notes. Go back and listen to this episode if you want to. But if you're at home and you have some time, or you're at your desk at work, or you're listening to this at the gym, here's some questions I think you should ask yourself. The first question I think you should ask yourself is, what do I need to do? What would I do if I had all the resources? What would I do if I had all the resources to do what I wanted to do. I think that that's a huge indicator. You start finding out what you actually love to do. If money was not an object, if money was not the problem, and you could just go out and do whatever you want to do, what would you do if you had all the resources? Here's my second question for you. What are some of the things that you are naturally good at? And how can you develop those talents? What are you going to do? I've shared the story many, many times on here on Leading, that when I was in high school, I got involved in speech and debate. When I was in high school, I was in vocal performance at this performing arts school that I went to. These things forced me. These things required that I learn how to speak in the moment, how to be impromptu, how to be in front of people, how to understand, get beyond my anxiety or the feeling that I had that I couldn't do something. It actually pushed me and forced me to operate at a higher level or learn to perform in any given moment. Because of those situations, it actually taught me some skills. And I developed the skills that I have. I've developed this. I've worked on speaking. I've worked on relating to people, even with podcasting and vlogging. I've shared this many, many times before here on Leading, that this has been a process. I had to learn how to produce. I had to learn how to edit content. I had to learn how to upload stuff to YouTube and upload stuff to Spreaker and all these different platforms and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Amazon Podcasts. I had to learn how to do all this stuff. Had no experience before. But the fact of the matter is, I was willing to learn some stuff because I wanted to invest and develop my talents and develop the things I want to work on and do. Here's my next question. I just said it right then. In which ways are you developing skills around your talents? Literally, I was able to become a producer because I developed some skills along with the fact that I can talk. I interview people, and that led me to get a contract with a $2.5 billion company. A $2.5 billion company hired me to come and do something for them because not only could I interview them, but I could produce the content for them to be able to deal with an issue that they wanted to talk about. Have you developed some skills around what you can do? I think that you can do it if you actually take some time and actually evaluate and look at what it is that is possible for you. And this is my last question for you. How can you use those talents to develop your leadership? Listen, this is a leadership development podcast. This is a personal development podcast. I talk about this all the time. I want every single person that listens to this and watches this to realize that you have a capacity and level of leadership. The world needs you to show up. The world needs you to be effective at what you do. The world actually is indebted to you. The world actually needs you in it to be effective. But you got to realize and figure out, how are my talents helping me develop and be a leader in my space? Listen, I learn all these things. I've gone to seminars. I've listened to people. I've engaged in content to grow and learn, not because I just want to be good at this. I actually want to be a leader in the spaces that I'm in. Like I said, every person has a capacity and level of leadership, and you got to recognize that you got to value the level in which you're supposed to be effective, and you have to value the capacity that you have. You got to be willing to develop it. Nobody's going to develop it for you. You got to be willing to develop it. But are you going to take some time to do that? And the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm especially going to talk about it more in depth on the next episode of Leading with Lee, is that this month is Women's History Month. Today is Women's History Day, International Women's History Day, and it is March 8th. And we acknowledge the contributions that women have made in our country and our society. And on the next episode, I'm going to do a little bit of deep diving into talking about just talking specifically to women. And I hope guys will listen to this too, because it gives you some insight on how we should approach how to empower women so that they can continuously make strides and make a difference in our culture and our world. And in acknowledging Women's History Month, I want to acknowledge the fact that some of the greatest leaders that have impacted me have been women. Women who were brilliant, women who knew who they were and knew what they wanted to do. As I said earlier, I encourage you to listen to the other episodes that are coming out on the podcast stream. Listen to my friends, Andrea Roll and Ryan Gordon. They're going to give you some insight about what they have lived through and what they have done that are going to be super impactful for you to have some perspective as it relates to this idea of leadership. But you got to understand that you cannot go through your life without having some perspective and without having an understanding of how people do what they do. And this year is super exciting because I'm so excited for you to hear those women, but also realize that you as a woman, you can be effective. You do not have to dampen yourself. You don't have to change your personality. You don't have to become a different person for people to respect and honor the fact that you are an effective leader. Because you got to recognize that it started somewhere for you. It started somewhere for you. It is not your job to do leadership like anybody else. You have to do leadership like you do leadership. You have to walk in your capacity to be effective the way you can walk in that. So my encouragement to you today is no matter who you are, no matter where you are, I hope that you recognize that you can make a difference in the world around you, that you can be effective and that the world needs you to be you. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time here on Leading with Lee. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. If you have not done it yet, subscribe on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. If you want to get more information and connect with me, visit me at www.leeascott.com or follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lee A. Scott II or Lee A. Scott II. So thank you for watching, much love, and let's get started.